All right, here is the snapshot of our first session slide, and now we're ready to get right into it. So, our first panel of Generation Analog, again with the topic of green, is entitled Gaming Green. Again, to give everyone as much time as possible, we are saving the bios for the Discord, but also we will all simply be announcing the titles in turn as they come up, as well as the names um, of the presenters. So our first paper this morning, or this afternoon, or this evening is How Green is Green Play? Game Washing in Analog Board Games, and this is presented by Jérôme Legrix-Pagès.
Close enough.
Thank you.
All right. So I changed a little the title of my presentation. Okay, so hello and thank you to the organizer for having me and to all you for being here. So I'm gonna try to see. Okay, it's working. So games have staged of bound with plants, animals, and cultivation for a very long time. Mancala, one of the oldest games still played, is in effect a farming game, a game about sowing life, representing nature through play is very old. What is new is the claim. Today, today's environmental game promise more than representation. They promise to grow our awareness, our responsibility, even our will to act. They offer to make us care for the planet, and they sell that offer. 3 years ago, at Aasa conference, after speaking with Alexandre Poyet, author of the game Limit, I set out to sort the games that engage seriously with ecology from those that merely look green. I compared four things: rhetoric, material production, mechanics, and expected experience. And I called the gap between them transformative washing. That was useful, but after a presentation of an early version of this work in a conference in Montreal last May, I had a conversation with Maud Bonenfant, and she showed me I was still asking the wrong question. I was asking whether a game delivered its promise. Yet, deliver already treats transformation as a thing in the box, something you can measure with a grid. My critique of the market was itself built like an audit. So today I change the question, not how much transformation a game contains, but what ecological world it makes playable and what it lets player do. So this argument stands on four distinctions. Representation is not understanding, choice is not agency, feeling is not it's not transformation, and purchase it's not praxis. That sound maybe obvious, yet marketing collapses them all the time. A game can show endangered species without explaining extinction. It can offer endless choices while allowing only optimization. It can move us without changing anything. And buying a game about the planet, it is not in itself an ecological act. Each of these can feed a real encounter. The problem starts when evidence at what level is sold as evidence at another. When a label, a moving scene, or a clever rule is offered as a proof of a future change player. This is first, in my opinion, a question about where virtue resides. I borrow a distinction from Alasdair MacIntyre. Virtues are formed by practice. They are not qualities that pass from an object to whoever buys it. Buying a virtuous thing does not make a virtuous subject. The trouble comes when a product is tied to a better version of yourself, more caring, more aware, and sold as a down payment on that self. We then have to ask whether the promise can, credit the commodity with something that only practice can produce. And one fact matters is, which the slide documents, the promise is often not the designer's. It belongs to the publisher, the marketing, the campaign page. The rules are written by one hand and the moral claim frequently by another. Much of the washing lives in that decoupling, and that same decoupling quietly shifts responsibility. The buyer is asked to carry through a purchase what the producers does not. So I move from the game object to the event of playing. Following Jacques Henriot and Maud Bonnon's from reading of him, play does not live in the rules alone. It lives in what a player freely does with them. And here in game studies, we already have the tool. In Against Procedurality, Miguel Sigart warns that the rules do not carry meaning by themselves. Players make meaning through play. So the mechanics matters, but they never settle the outcome. My proposition follows. A game is not transformative in itself. It can take part in a transformative event. And by event, I mean a one-off encounter that cannot be preloaded into the product. It is spread across the artifact, the players, the situation, and what comes after. And this sets my method. So levels 1 and 2 are the only one I will deal with. So what the game is claimed to do and what the game is configured to do. Its paratext and its mechanics read together. I do not measure real transformation, so I will not claim it. I only conclude on what I actually saw. So what the game claims and how it is built. Level 3 to 5 require observation and interviews. I didn't have time to do, and that will be the work for the year to come. So let me illustrate that with two games, Dame Nature and Forest Shuffle. So why these two games? Not at random. It's from a corpus of some 40 environmental or social titles. I take two that hold the theme steady but invert the social structure. One is built on competition, one on cooperation. It's a more similar pair designed to isolate what the configuration does. Following Lynda Chang, the question is not how much ecological content each holds, but what kind of nature each makes playable. Take Forest Shuffle, and let's see the mechanics first. The rulebook asks the player to build an ecologically balanced habitat. This is not empty language. Trees host species, bats reward diversity, lynxes depend on roe deer, and through conditional scoring, the game really does encode habitat and association. But it makes ecology legible through one operation, what sociologists call commensuration, turning unlike things into one common measure. Here, every relation becomes victory points. Each player grows a private forest. The shared clearing is not a commons to sustain. It is a stock to exploit for a tableau you alone own. So interdependence becomes accumulation, and the game offers only one position, the strategic arranger, valuing living things by their yield. Let's see the paratext now. So around the game, the green sits on the material level. FSC paper, no plastic, and that is real, and it is worth crediting, this is good. But author and publisher speak with one voice, and nothing in that voice questions the competitive engine at the core, this dissonance. The promise and the mechanics do not pull apart here. They simply point the same way. Well, optimize a balanced forest and feel green about doing it. Now, on the other pole, Dame Nature. Dame Nature. I don't know how to pronounce that. It's a French game by Julien Protière, Jeu au plat. Anyway, let's speak about the mechanics. The game is quite new, so maybe you don't know it. So players rebuilt a fabric of life, conditions before species, spacing, and enabling further conditions up to the final species, which is a golden eagle. Each needed card is dealt out, but no one sees the other's hand. Actions are simultaneous, speech is restricted, only scarce exchanges let a card pass, and a mistimed card is lost. So the ecological chain runs through a social one. Spaces depends on condition and on each other. Players depends on scattered information and timing. That is a structural echo between ecological and social dependence. On neither side does any element hold full control or full information. So the mechanic, in my opinion, do more genuine ecological work than forest shuffle. But let's see the paratext. So the paratext is in French because it's a French game. So this is my translation. So my translation of the French version. Okay. So here the two games diverge. Author, publisher, and the naturalist of France Nature Environment appear by name. The paratext reaches outward, past the table, which is quite interesting. But I will not crown it. The base game stays teleological. One path leading to one eagle, and no humans at all in the web. Disturbance, climate, invasive species, all of that wait in advanced module for those who go looking. So even here, the reaching out is real, but optional. A door held open, not a step taken. And the door is exactly what the last part of my argument is about. Because I think I can now define precisely the terms of my study. So transformative washing, narrowly, presenting a contingent effect of a situated play as an intrinsic purchasable property of the game. So contingent is the hinge. A game can stage an encounter, spark an affect, host an inquiry. It cannot contain transformation as a guaranteed output. And this is not necessarily a deliberate lie. It can simply be how the market works. Cultural industries sell not only objects, but better selves. And that points to a second wider term, transformative capture. And let me be also exact about what it adds. The recuperation of critique by capitalism is familiar. Boltanski and Capello map it very well already. Capture is narrower and more specific. What is appropriated, it is not a political critique, but a subjective capacity, the player's own power to make meaning in play. That power belongs to a situated practice, subjects, relation, context. Capture is when the commodity, the game, claims that power as its own feature and sells it back. Yet, it is not one-sided. A game is neither poisoned or cure alone. The same device can prescribe a moral reading and provoke indifference, resistance, disagreement, refusal. The real question is whether the play situation leaves the player able to appropriate and contest what it sets in motion. Oscar Freire draws, I think, the last line. Exposure is not awareness is not problematization, and problematization is not yet conscientization, which for him is inseparable from praxis. Praxis is reflection joined to action on the world. A choice inside a game may represent action or rehearse it, but it is not praxis. I call that distance the praxis gap between acting ecologically inside a game and gaining the power to act beyond it. And okay, I'll try to, I guess I'm okay for the timing. So let me conclude and also maybe widen a little the lens. So those two games are examples. They are small. They are not that important. But the stake is not. When a cultural industry sells not just objects, but better selves, the transformative promise becomes a way to legitimize consumption. And it does what I flagged at the start. It shifts the burden of change onto the buyer and away from the producer. On the producer's side, Benjamin Abraham is blunt. He makes the case for digital games. The real climate weight lies in how they are made and shipped, not in the message they carry. For our analog corpus, the materiality differs, of course, paper, print, freight rather than servers. But I think the logic holds. And the promise can even work against its own cause if feeling green comes to stand in for acting green. That is why the question is not how green is this game, a question that keeps us inside the market's own terms. The question is, what does this game make possible? For whom? In which situation? And what must still happen beyond that game for that possibility to become praxis? A game can configure an encounter, a play situation can become transformative, but I think that no commodity can guarantee praxis. Thank you for your attention. I don't know if I'm okay with the timing. And I
Jérôme,
guess
you nailed it. This was wonderful. Thank you so much. And again, a round of applause for a wonderful 15-minute talk that encapsulates so many issues that will be raised in the next 2 days. I really appreciate that. I'm going to move on to our next set of speakers. And again, this is not to downplay what we just heard. I've said so many thoughts, but I'm just going to move us along in my moderator function. I'm going to like to call Lynda Dunlop and Prasad Sandbhor to come and present their next presentation here. Green narratives in climate change board games, green reformist, green radical, or greenwashing. Very much in dialogue with the previous talk. So if I can get Prasad or Lynda to come to the forefront and share their screen.
Thanks. I think Prasad's going to drive the slides.
Wonderful. Well, it's lovely to see you, and then we'll see the slides in a moment. And there we have it. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. And yeah, thanks for having us. I think we're here as new friends of Generation Analog, so it's really great to meet people today. So I'm Lynda and Prasad's just there. We are researchers at the University of York. I'm in the education department and Prasad is in intelligent games and game intelligence. We also co-convene a Play for the Planet network, which is our take on green is environmental games, and we're presenting work that we did with Emerson Jakosky, one of our colleagues in Brazil, who's not here today. Shall we go to the next slide, please, Prasad? So yeah, this work came out of conversations that we had following just social gameplay for fun when we were quite often angrily talking about how climate change was represented in the games. And we were interested then in how should climate change be represented in popular culture? Is it a technical or scientific challenge? Is it a symptom of socio-economic and political systems gone wrong, or something else? And we realized that we didn't know how climate change was actually represented in these games, so decided to do this formal analysis. So we analysed entertaining board games because a lot of research already exists on games for learning, and entertainment games have that potential for like massive reach at scale. So yeah, we know that the majority of people are concerned about climate change, but they often don't want to talk about it because they don't want to have disagreements with friends or colleagues that they and they don't want to incite climate anxiety. Prasad, I think the slides have disappeared there. Yeah, we're back. So yeah, we know from existing research that we're on the next one. That's it, thanks. So we know from existing research that entertainment games with an environmental purpose can simplify environmental issues. They can allow people to communicate evidence on climate change, and then they can immerse players in microworlds. And then they also can enable, notwithstanding what Jérôme was talking about, they allow players to experience potential alternative realities in future, to try out different action and inaction in games, and then develop self-efficacy and create new habits and social norms. So how climate change is represented in games matters because these narratives or ways of seeing the world open up different possibilities for action or inaction, or even thinking about what action is possible. Next one. So in thinking about the different possible dialogues discourses, we drew on John Dryzik's work. He's a political theorist who identifies different types of green discourse depending on the scale of action. So whether it's reformist, so not very big scale, or radical, large changes, and whether it's prosaic, so does it cling on to the political economic status quo, or does it go beyond that and kind of rewrite the rules of the games? So these combination of these reformist, radical, prosaic, imaginative discourses give us different sorts of discourses: problem solving, survivalism, sustainability, and green radicalism. And if we go into the next one, so just to highlight some of the differences between these. So problem solving discourses, they put trust in experts, people in the market. So they stick to what we know with small change, just leave it to the experts. Survivalist discourses, they seek to redistribute power, but within that dialogue of industrialism. In sustainability discourses, then redefine growth and try to reconcile those the conflict between economic and environmental values. And then green radicalism dialogues, they reject the basic structure of industrial society and try to rethink how humans interact with the rest of nature. So, yeah, the methods that we used were critical discourse with games treated as text. So we looked at the materials and we played the games and reflected on those. So the sorts of questions that we were asking each other in doing this was who and what is represented in the game? What are the assumptions about relationships between people and other parts of nature? What causes the change? So what are the agents and motives in the games? And what are the metaphors and other rhetorical devices that are used? And we analysed then 5 games that met the criteria of being available in the UK at the time that we were doing the research and that made climate change explicit in the marketing. So we analysed Daybreak, Tipping Point, Carbon City Zero, Catan New Energies, and Kyoto. And I'm going to hand over to Prasad now, who will share our findings.
Yeah, thank you, Lynda. And yes, here are the findings from our research. So through the critical discourse analysis that we conducted, we found these 4 themes across the 5 games that we studied. You can look at our paper from this QR code and get into the more details of it. But right now, I'm just going to briefly share them one by one with you. So the first finding is that climate change is a problem to be solved, and this is the common narrative that we saw across all these 5 games. And by that, what we mean is that the win or lose conditions of these games represent that we need to reduce the greenhouse emissions in the world somehow, and that's what the whole game is about. So almost all games represent carbon or tracking or counting carbon in some or other form, like they are here through certain elements that they have. And while this is like the most prominent discourse or the most prominent bit to tackle climate change, it also in a way ignores the other dimensions that need to be addressed when it comes to dealing with the climate crisis, except for Daybreak, which is an exception, which looks at different parts of the world, starting with different kinds of conditions, and where it brings in those other aspects of climate change also into play. The second finding is that it's almost all about the money when it comes to all these 5 games. In across the 5 games, money is represented in some cases directly, like in case of Kyoto, and in some cases indirectly through, say, resources or certain kinds of policies or development cards. However, by doing that, all these games are sort of making money the center point to think through, or the economic systems being sort of restrictions or limitations over players from imagining radical futures or radical, say, systems or something which is very different from the one that we have right now. And again, that's something where we thought that Daybreak is trying to do something differently, because it allows you to take different projects at local and global levels, and it doesn't represent money directly in the game as such. Similarly, Carbon City Zero, apart from that, we saw that Carbon City Zero deals with the aspect of greenwashing very well, or Kyoto has this aspect of fossil fuel lobbying. So some of them have some of these nuances here and there, but overall, it's all about the money. The third finding is this, and here we're using this quote from George Orwell because we're looking at these 5 games from, say, 3 key questions. So, who's being represented in these climate change games? Who is participating in the decision making while addressing this challenge? And how are the impacts of climate change distributed on across the world? And what we see in these 5 games is that mostly most of them are very human centric, and non like other than human beings are not that much represented in these games, except for, say, Kyoto, which has these 5 animals that come into the gameplay somehow. But apart from that human centric perspective, very little attention is given to the colonial and capitalistic roots of the climate crisis in these games, and the global majority is also not represented in a meaningful manner. And while the democracy is sort of represented, but it's again not coming through the game mechanics themselves, and the aspects such as home relationships, family, friends, and different forms of social organizations are absent while most of these games deal with the challenge at a global scale. So although like expecting all these bits, especially like a statement around capitalism or colonialism from commercially available board games, is maybe a bit too much. But having said that, I think neglecting these aspects can be quite problematic because they may reinforce the harmful systems that are already there. So that's something that these games can do better in the future. And the last finding is that across all these games, we win or lose them together, which is a very important common theme that we saw across these games, irrespective of whether they were competitive or collaborative. Most of these games are collaborative. Those which are competitive also have a collaborative mode to play, except for Catan New Energies. But be it of either of these formats, in these games, if players are very much linked to each other, like the outcomes are highly interconnected, and even if one player loses, other players are also losing, or if one player is winning, it's still quite a rhetorical question for the winner to wonder that did they actually win. So yeah, in conclusion, while we were doing this research, we enjoyed playing all of these games. They brought us together with the community. We discussed lots of things over the table, and as a like a reflection, we thought that the future games in this space can have more radical imaginings of the world, which is demonstrated in Daybreak a little bit. But yeah, just to help people make connections between the game and the real world better. So we saw that some of these games already do that, or some of them carry additional material in the box, which helps people reflect on the game better or think about the real world connections. However, to take it further, we thought a debriefing element can be added to the end of these games. Like after we play these games, people can talk a bit more about them, about what happened in the game, what they can take away from it in a slightly formal manner, and maybe there can be more that we can discover or sort of reveal through this kind of discussion at the end of the game. And that's our future work, where we are looking at this game called After Game that we have developed, and using that as a game for reflecting or debriefing after we have played environmental or climate change games. Well, that's about that, and these are some of our references. Again, do check out this QR code for our work, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Prasad, and you brought us back exactly to be on schedule with your talk. So that, again, concise and very informative at the same time. I'm going to move on to our third speaker today in this panel, who is Aasa Timonen, and she's going to be presenting plastic dystopia ideas towards more sustainable miniaturing practices. So Aasa, you are now in charge.
All right, thank you. I hope everyone can hear me. All right, cool. Let's assume so. I always like to do introduction, even though we kind of did that already. But I'm Aasa. I'm a doctoral researcher at Tampere University Game Research Lab, and my research focuses on transmedia world building, analog games with special focus on miniature wargaming, queer gaming, transgender play experiences, and most recently also negotiations of masculinity in gaming spaces as part of the project Against the Current of Manhood, Young Men's Negotiations of Outsiderhood and Gender Norms in Online Communities, for which we have funding until the end of 2028. 2028. All of this is a very long way to say that I really like Warhammer, and the next 15 minutes or less, this is going to be my special interest corner for now. So let's move to the topic itself. The impetus for this presentation came from my supervisor, who offhandedly mentioned one time the often heard sentiment that everything I have ever owned still exists, either repurposed for another use, sold to someone else, or eternally degrading in some landfill somewhere. Most of the things you have owned exist in one way or another. And this makes me think about miniatures and different byproducts that come from it. I have been playing Warhammer for over 20 years now. This is a picture of my actual painting desk from 2008 at my parents' place, and I own nothing of what is shown here anymore. But all of that is still somewhere. I actually think I still own the pliers in that picture, but everything else is gone. Most likely they are in a landfill somewhere. And this made me think about the ecological sustainability of miniature wargaming. And in this presentation, I want to look specifically at Warhammer as an example of these practices. In their studies on piles of shame, Mikko Meriläinen, Jaakko Stenros, and Kati Heliakka talk about more personal sustainability, one dependent on personal, spatial, economic, and existential sustainability of miniature collection. Is cultivating piles of shame sustainable from personal perspective when thinking about how much money is sitting there, taking up space and creating anxiety of unfinished projects? Ian Williams and Samuel Tobin approached this from the perspective of memory work done by the old hammer practitioners who collect older or out-of-date production models as a way to engage in their nostalgia of what Warhammer used to be. This presentation is focused on Warhammer very specifically, and while equating all of miniature wargaming with Warhammer is problematic, much in the same way as equating D&D with all of role-playing game is, the production size of Games Workshop in comparison to any other company producing models or paints makes it the biggest fish in the pond and the best example to look at. Games Workshop started by making lead and white metal models in the late 70s, early 80s, but in the late 80s, they moved towards plastic models, expanding their range of plastics in the 90s and established them as a norm during the 2000s. In the early 2010s, Games Workshop added resin models to their roster, slowly phasing metal models out of their production entirely. While initially these plastic models were considered to be too toy-like compared to metal models by hobbyists, and they were ridiculed for it, Games Workshop insistence on using plastic has become an industry norm at this point. And if you don't know, there's like a huge vat of molten plastic that is basically kept constantly in a state of being melting point to like upkeep the Games Workshop production line, which is crazy to me. And Games Workshop is not unaware of the problem with plastic manufacturing, both from ecological and economic perspective, with prices of such materials as oil rising increasingly fast. They introduced a recycling trial in 2023, where you could bring plastic excess of their model kits or sprues and empty paint pots for recycling. This initiative has been welcomed, but for obvious and logistical issues, it has been only introduced in UK and not much has been heard of it since. The main effort of sustainability lies on individual hobbyists preserving their excess plastics for other uses, such as crafting terrain and even making new models with them, such as using the aforementioned sprues to make terrain for the games, or using old paint pots to make miniatures. This is mine. I made it from a plastic card and excess bits and one Citadel paint pot. The current form of production and game design of Warhammer are linked to a 3-year cycle of a seasonal play. Editions change every 3 years, sometimes retiring older models out of the game and adding more new releases for purchase. During these cycles, the patch metagame cycle of competitive game encourages repeated purchases and changing your collections to match the current meta of the game. As long as the meta of Warhammer is meta play of competitive mode, this system is there to stay, which exists only to feed a consumerist approach to miniature wargaming. Question arises. Is this system sustainable? For Games Workshop, it is in one way, as their line keeps going up and they keep making more and more money each year. But for how long? Can this last? Can we change how we approach the wargaming personally? Here I present few embodied practices that change how wargamers can approach miniaturing from different frameworks that Games Workshop expects from us. One approach is the anarchic counterplay of Warhammer, as exemplified by such subcultures as Inq28 or Inquisition 28, which is focused on personalization, storytelling, crafting, and turning the normal environment of Warhammer into a space of random interactions, using either older rules or homemade rule sets that better fit a smaller narrative form of miniature wargaming. These approaches focus on emergent activities that are not provided by the company making the game, or they are going back to time when the company did offer that opportunity for them. And the way InQ28 practitioners talk about InQ28 is not even in the format of a game or even an event. They talk about or like game or competition or something like that. They talk about storytelling and shared storytelling, which is very much not how Games Workshop currently talks about Warhammer. Instead of following the expected route of upgrading your armies and books for new editions whenever they came out, this can be resisted by playing slowly, lingering in the older editions of the game, playing with models that are no longer in production, actively not engaging with the mode of production and the neoliberal ideology behind it. This is akin to the aforementioned practice of old hammering, which nostalgically remembers the older game version of Games Workshop, which offered a different way of engaging with the hobby before the current mode was set in. As Williams and Tobin put it, they dream of a past made in metal. The effectiveness of these embodied changes are contingent on shared participation in them. Warhammer has a massive following, and while the movements that go against the mainstream exists, they are not sharing popularity with the more established modes of competitive gaming. Indeed, old hammering itself has been challenged by Games Workshop with the re-release of their Old World, offering a more mainstream way of engaging with one of their older games. And there has been some people moving from playing with their older books and older armies to upgrading them with the models that are again in production and thus continuing to feeding the consumerist cycle. Yet the anxieties about the current mode exists in these communities too, as the discussions on rising costs of models and paints, the cycling out of editions and models, and exhaustion brought by fast turnaround of editions are real and tangible, and you can hear them in every community, regardless they are old hammer people or more competitive aimed players like myself. Which is the start point, which is in the end, I must admit my own hypocrisy here, as I am not an old hammer practitioner, not anymore, and neither do I participate in InQ28 play communities. I'm a lurker in most of them. I'm a competitive Age of Sigmar player who just spent a lofty sum to travel to Italy to play at the AOS World Steam Championships. That is not what I would call a ecologically sustainable way of doing this hobby. The problem is that Warhammer, with all these aforementioned issues, is really fun right now, probably more approachable than it has ever been before. And that modern Warhammer is exemplified by adding more women and gender non-conforming identities into the game and adding to the visibility of minorities and women in general in the making of the games. One of the downsides of old hammering is that it took Games Workshop agonizingly long to add other than male figures to their games in any meaningful way. And my task is to figure out a way to combine the best ways of modern Warhammer with the embodied practices presented in this talk. A mission which I hopefully I will complete with a full paper offering new ways of approaching miniature wargaming from a more sustainable perspective. And I thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Aasa, for that talk. And again, I'm really looking forward to getting into the weeds a little bit about that this problem between accessible miniaturing and of course environmentally sustainable miniaturing. All right. Well, we now are on to our final paper and panelist this morning, which is Chang, who will be presenting PokéFinance, Financialization, Pokemon trading card game, and our PokeInvesting. So, Changi, if you want to come to the foreground and present, and we're looking forward to hearing what you have to say on Pokemon.
Great, thank you so much. I'm hoping that everyone can see my screen. But hi everyone, my name is Changie, and as per the title of my talk, I'll be discussing the presence of financialization alongside finance rhetoric and logics within the Pokemon trading card game subreddit community, r/PokeInvesting. And I will hereon refer to Pokemon trading card game as PTCG. So let's get with it. Why did the value of this card drop? Asks one user on the subreddit. Well, because it's cardboard, replies another. Why did the value drop? Well, it's just cardboard. But what might we learn from cardboard? This paper focuses on the visual culture within the PokeInvesting subreddit and argues that r/PokeInvesting operates as a space of financialization, where finance logics are both replicated and reproduced within images in the subreddit. The finance memes within our PokeInvesting assert the relevancy of finance within spaces through their legibility, while the screenshots of user portfolio graphs operate to legitimize the violent abstraction of objects into speculated value. This paper focuses on the visual culture and argues that it is critical to analyze spaces of financialization because of the ways in which finance is fundamentally rooted within violent histories and continued endurances of enslavement and racism. This work explores this history specifically through insurance policies for enslaved people, with insurance being one institution of finance. And as a content warning, in this talk, I will be discussing the ways in which these policies extracted value from the murder of Black people, just as a content warning. In understanding finance and financialization as inherently violent, the embedding of finance rhetoric within cultures oriented around games highlights the necessity of examining the role that games play in the reproduction and normalization of institutional logics within everyday life. So what is this subreddit? The r/PokeInvesting subreddit defines itself as everything related to Pokemon investing and PokeFinance. So the subreddit discusses the value of PTCG merchandise, asks for buying and selling advice, and generally hosts any content related to PTCG as a financial investment. The timeframe I chose to analyze for posts was between October and November of 2025, which is when I noticed an increase in posts discussing the value of PTCG and a lot of perception that like the market is crashing. It should be noted that in October and November, the average weekly visitors page was 343,000. And as you can see now, the number is now increased to over 500,000 visitors per week, showing the significant growth and interest in Pokemon investing specifically, as I'm sure many of you have been hearing through social media and news outlets. In this paper, I used Gerald Epstein and Greta Krippner's widely cited definitions of financialization as the increasing role of financial motives, financial markets, financial actors, and financial institutions within daily life, which also follows this pattern of accumulation in which profits accrue primarily through their financial channels rather than through trade and commodity production. End quote. While there are multiple ways to define finance, it is broadly understood as the study and management of money. While we tend to think about finance specifically as just investments and Wall Street, there are many industries included within finance, such as real estate and insurance, which we'll come back to in a minute. The literature on financialization, mainly within economic sociology, has highlighted how financialization has violent effects, arguing that neoliberalism is actually a reassertion of finance, that financialization creates dispossession, wealth disparity, and feeds carceral institutions. But instead of showing how financialization has violent effects, I argue that financialization in and of itself is violent. And in order to understand this, we need to come back to insurance. Amy Bride argues that a key moment in racial capitalism is the point where the slave body becomes financialized. And Bride coins this term, racial finance, as the valuation of Black bodies not through the capital they produce via physical labor, but rather through the value attributed to their bodies through the institutions of insurance and life insurance policies, which guaranteed capital gains for, quote, white speculators, insurers, and creditors. Bride shows how slave life insurance, which was more akin to property insurance than we would imagine life insurance to be today, ensured that value could be extracted from Black people even if they ceased to live, where the Black body was made, quote, more valuable dead than alive, and destroying Black people operated as further capital extraction. And this was made possible through the liquidity attributed to the Black body and its stable recognition of value across states, a kind of investment that maintains its value and is recognized regardless of jurisdiction. Bride shows how the Black body became an exchangeable, portable, and stable source of speculated value through extraction. And in drawing on Karen Ryder's work, Bride highlights how depending on fluctuations in price due to these unregulated slave markets, it was possible to buy an enslaved person at a lower price than what they would have been insured for. And so Ryder highlights one example of an enslaved person named Dandridge, who was bought in 1850 and then whose value, quote, appreciated by more than 250% within 4 years. If Dandridge died, the insurance policy provided meant that the slave owner would receive approximately 1.75 times the initial investment made in 1850. And then by 1855, there were no more records kept of Dandridge. It is unclear what happened to them, but the lack of records suggests that Dandridge died, with the archival possibility and high likelihood that they were killed by the person who owned them. Catherine McKitteridge, in thinking through Black archival presence, states, this is where historic Blackness comes from. The list, the breathless numbers, the absolutely economic, the mathematics of the unliving. The mathematics involved in Dandridge's story highlight the grotesqueness of racial finance, the liquidity of the Black body, the fungibility of Blackness, speculative value, and white profit of Black death. The opportunity for slave owners to buy enslaved people, murder them, cash in on the insurance, and then use the profits to buy more enslaved people is what Ryder terms the, quote, perpetuity of income, where white slave owners continuously profit of the extermination of Black folks and Black bodies who exist, as Bride has argued, as, quote, neither dead nor alive. This history is disturbingly present on one of the most commonly cited pieces of advice given for those interested in investments, which is buy low, sell high. While it could be argued that life insurance is not a form of selling, I would argue that in this example of Dandridge, there is an explicit exchange happening that we must understand as a sale. A body is exchanged for money based on an earlier financial agreement that is made. It is in all its horrifying truth, a contract, a trade, and trading activity. Ryder's detailing of Dandridge's story eerily paralleled what I had seen on the r/PokeInvesting subreddit, the same rhetoric, which was this meme, buy the dip. Buy the dip is a shorthand advice for buying stocks and investments when they are dropping in value, hence buying the perceived dip, with the understanding that they will likely bounce back up in value, therefore making profits. This rhetoric is another example of buy low, sell high. And this particular meme, this like poorly drawn graph, is meant to represent a market fluctuation. And the bottom of the image actually says posted in r/cryptocurrency. And this is one example of a broader category of memes I noticed within the group that have no reference to Pokemon at all in the image, the text, or the title. But even without any references to Pokemon, the meme was still incredibly relevant to the group, with 590 upvotes and 114 comments in this PokeInvesting subreddit. These finance memes highlight how violent finance rhetoric can actually travel freely unattached and be applied to practically anything. These memes show how the normalized legibility of finance guarantees its disturbing reproduction and how visual culture is used in this process. The poorly drawn graph and the respective peaks and lows are funny in how low quality they are, while at the same time having a high amount of fidelity to the experience that people tend to have when it comes to investing. Against this plain white background, the crude graph is made to be relatable and humorous in its simplicity, showing these various stages of regret when it comes to investing. But we know that the history of finance and these logics are far from humorous. The normalization of buy low, sell high as a logical, mathematical, economic principle instead of a violent logic rooted within racial finance shows the insidiousness by which these logics are embedded within daily life. At the end of the day, this meme is a value graph. It is a poorly drawn graph tracking investment value over time. And I found that there's actually a very strong visual culture around these kinds of investment graphs within the subreddit, where users would frequently post these screenshots of their collection speculated value through these investment tracking apps, such as Collector. The visualization of abstracted, speculated value through mathematical graphics furthers the violence of financialization through how entities are deemed assets and reducible to numbers in the speculated future and present. The question may be, what is the harm in understanding cardboard, such as Pokemon, through a finance rhetoric of speculated and abstracted value? What is the harm of reducing Pokemon to numbers? And my argument here is not that Pokemon trading cards are being subjected to racial violence. Rather, I'm arguing that the ways in which financialization moves through and folds itself into this Pokemon trading card online community and culture exemplifies the replication and legitimization of finance logics through game cultures. Value graphs, such as the ones these users are posting, are used as legitimate evidence for explaining current market trends, as well as the potential future of the market. They also visually legitimize buy low, sell high logics and calculating abstracted speculated value as a logical and useful means of understanding, but also tracking the past, present, and projected future. In measuring value against time, these graphs point to a way of seeing an orientation where the present is dictated by a speculated value that is unmoored from the present itself and the object itself, and is actually instead just abstracted into the future. Speculative value is a value that thinks about the future. The object is not just the object as it exists in the present, but as it is projected to exist theoretically in the future, hence Bride's analysis of black bodies as neither dead nor alive. The abstraction of the future but not quite future and gross financialization of the present but not quite present operates to reorient the present and future, not through time, but value. With time itself being defined through abstracted value, financialization's ability and perhaps ultimate project to restructure time itself operates as a violent societal reformulation that guarantees financialization's touch on all facets of life. In essence, yes, it is just cardboard. But what on earth have we recruited cardboard for? My references are as follows. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Changie. And again, thanks to all four panelists or for presentations for maintaining discipline on time, which gives us again a full half hour for questions. I usually start off this, I mean, it's just sort of ritual. I usually start off with several questions myself as a moderator, also to give people time I'm actively checking the Discord, so you can put your questions there. Of course, Phil Cameron asks the really important question in the chat of what army Aasa plays. So Aasa, you could respond to that however you wish, and and otherwise, my first question actually has to do with I guess the fact that this is a designer-oriented academic conference, that most of us are also designers as well as academics, or there are designers who are tuning in or trying to tune in that want to know more. And one of the things that we had going for us in the 2000s in the indie tabletop role-playing scene is a total lack of ISBNs or any official creative, sort of licensing of our products. No one submitted for copyright or trademark. Very few people did, and no one submitted for ISBNs. And this, again, relevant to Aasa and Chang's presentations, created a unconscious secondary market 30 years in the future. So now we have these limited print runs that people can collect of independent role-playing games that will then, accrue value that the creators will likely never see themselves. And sort of this valuation, I guess one way is to look at it in terms of financial valuation, but then as the first two papers suggested, there's also a moral component there where we're sort of laundering moral legitimacy through this. So again, all panelists, you're welcome to come in for the Q&A, and my and the first question I've gotten is from Joe. This is for Lynda and Prasad. The question is, did you find any reticence to play games that preached a message? I have found this at my table. So we'll do that, and then again I will follow up with my designer question.
Shall I start, Prasad?
Absolutely. Yeah. Go ahead for it.
Um, I don't know about reluctance, but I think the people who we've played with are probably people who are fairly interested, or at least not, they don't reject the idea of climate change. So I'd say at the moment we make open invitations for people to come and play. But yeah, I don't know, Prasad, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, and also I would add that some players who played were there because they knew about the games. If, for instance, for about Daybreak or sorry, not Carbon City Zero, Catan New Energies, that they knew about it, so they wanted to try it out, and that's why they were there. But yeah, like Lynda said, that most of these players were open to these ideas, or they rather were keen on exploring those.
Yeah, and I guess that this again brings me to my larger question for again for game design, which is what values and virtues are you creating with your game, and do people think about that, right? Consciously when they are creating something. For example, to address Asa's presentation, do I know that I am creating a collectible element right? That then later can be financialized in my design, right? How and then is that then going to be priced into, logics of environmental sustainability, especially as, I should say this again and again. We know a lot about the impact of these board games. We just don't know what to do with, we know a lot about the environmental impact, right? Because we have to get things printed in particular circumstances. They need to be shipped via containerization around the world. And all of this requires an enormous amount of resources, also a lot of which is involuntary. If you ask any U.S. publisher who's producing any of these major board games, even with ecological themes, they will of course say we send our files to China, and China will print them for us and send them via container. And if you disrupt this process in any way, you are adding enormous costs to the designer as well as to the consumer on the other end. Of course, any costs that the designer is going to accrue will pass on to the consumer. Um, Nevertheless, and this is an issue that we're encountering. In order for us as sort of all-star consumers, I'm going to say this about myself and Megan Condis, who are buying too many Kickstarters these days. We are plugging lots of folks' work and paying for it ourselves and buying it, and then it becomes, again, to reference Aasa's presentation, the piles of shame, and the piles of shame, are now our games that we'll never play, or maybe we'll sometime get to when we're like not busy, and we're always busy. And so there's this kind of interesting aspect of it that I think where we have to now be very conscious of how not only the materials we have circulate, but also um, my but also the values, right? What are these games saying? Which again is where I see Lynda and Prasad's work, right? Where you just sat down and said, "What is this game telling me? Is it competitive or is it cooperative? How do we sort of build a baseline of sort of meaning out of that?" So I guess yeah, my big question, and this is for all panelists, is what is the game designer message that you would like? What would you like to say to game designers with your work? You can also say nothing. That's a appropriate response. But what would you like to tell game designers with your work? And Jerome, you gave the I would say the most contentious presentation on this topic, or most straightforward
Okay, so
argument. So I would say you could enter in right now if you wish.
I can try, but let me be honest about what I'm entitled to say, because I'm also as well designing games. Well, I can't. Well, what I've studied is only, what I said, the structure of the game and the paratext. So it's not like I have the answer. That's my first answer. But I think for the designer, first, you've got your responsibility about the rule system you're gonna make. So I think the Ludo dissonance is something you can work on. So starting with that, which configuration, which game configuration are you choosing to create? You are speaking about the world. So in this way, what is the meaning of this speech? So that's, I guess, the first responsibility. But after that, uh, it's something we give to the players, and we don't know what they will do with that. So our position is offering them the possibility. So when they will be playing, do they have choices to be more than once more players who will accumulate things, getting points, and at the end win or lose? Maybe it's sometimes interesting to think outside this victory points mantra. And most ecological games offer the player a view from above, which is very few games put them inside the web as one dependent thing among others. So maybe something can be done. And I think the last thing is, okay, so once my box is closed, what happens? And that's something we never really think about. Well, if the game is working, and if it's sold, and if it's edited, I guess published, I guess we've got what we were hoping. But there is a conversation going after the game. So maybe designers can also invest all that after the game, after a game. And there are maybe spaces online where when we can meet the players. But once more, I do not have the answer. uh,
Yeah, I think what's also interesting is the designers and the publishers' awareness of secondary markets or other means of reading their game from then on. You're right, where you kind of you establish that the gameplay is fun, you provide the appropriate thematic wrapping, and then it's only later again because we humans read text, we play text, we interpret them, that then maybe 5 years, 10 years down the line we can say, oh, this is what this was really seems to be saying, especially when it was coming out of this moment when, this is how much carbon dioxide is being put out in the atmosphere and the air how animals were being treated and so forth.
Because if we do not want to have any carbon footprint, well, we can stop producing anything, stop playing, stop creating new games. Just play with your existing ones, and well, that's it. And that could be an answer, but I guess it goes against our creativity. We have also things to say through game creation. Tough
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. Lynda and Prasad, what would you tell designers?
I guess one thing through our work is what sort of conversations do you want people to have? What do you want them to pay attention to? What do you want to be the focus of discussion? And I think in those games where they were about trading things or buying things, then the conversation becomes about money or getting richer rather than what projects do you want to do. Like in Daybreak, it's about what way do you want to shape your society? So I think the key thing for designers is what do you want to have those conversations about? And what issues or who do you want to be represented in those conversations? So for example, in the kind of absence of other than humans, like should they be included in discussions and decisions about how we act? So I think those are the two key things for me, Prasad.
Yeah, just adding to that, I think I would say so again, like Jerome, I'm a researcher, but I also design games. So looking at it from a designer's perspective, I think when you are making something, just adding to what Lynda said, that uh, it like it's like the whole is greater than some of its parts. So what you're making, it has a larger impact, and it can work in many different dimensions. Like but some of the games that we studied, probably they were not even designed from an intention of becoming a game like which says something specifically about climate change. Some of them maybe just because it's a trending theme they made it like that, or they were trying to look at a specific target audience and were trying to make a game for those kind of board gamers. But because of the theme that they have chosen, because of the systems that they're working with in the game, the narrative, there is a lot more that these games have the potential for. And I think if designers are stumbling upon such things when they're working on their ideas, then maybe it's really useful to then look into the research a little bit, or look at it from a researcher point of view, and then see what more can come out of this, so that the conversations, as Lynda was saying, can happen when people play these games or after they play these games. And also adding to that, maybe some of these games need not just limit to the board game community itself. Like say right now, most of these games are really popular on Board Game Geek, and board gamers look at them from a very different mindset, but they could be used, or they rather can be usable, or in other contexts, like say specifically in say climate change education space, or yeah, in different ways where the people are not board gamers. So how do they play these games? Like how do we maybe reduce the barrier to play when it comes to these players who can also benefit out of the game, not just the fun part of it, but also something more than that. So maybe that's also something which designers can think about. Maybe they can provide some additional material. They can partner with researchers or other experts who can then create this material which scaffolds the game, also in some way highlights the takeaways from it, or makes people think or have those kind of conversations around them. So yeah, I guess that's what I would suggest.
Yeah, so it's discursive both in taking part in a larger game conversation, between designers and between products, but also trying to start certain types of conversations with and among the players. Wonderful. Also, what would you tell designers?
The I will send them the Sonic meme. Make smaller games and like pay people more, and like I think a lot of game industry in both digital and analog sense are like they are at this kind of like approaching, if not yet they're like peak excessive, peak form, like action movie cinema in the 90s was in the peak form of its own excessives, and then something happened that brought it down. I feel the same way is happening for board games. When you look at like the Kickstarter games that you mentioned before, most of my tabletop friends nowadays play either Commander or board games from Kickstarter that last 6 hours, and in order to make them, you have to burn a whole forest down. So I'm not sure if that form of board game making is very sustainable either. And same goes for miniature making. Like the plastic market is now the norm, basically, and we are getting more and more miniature manufacturers as well, but none of them are really challenging the norms set by Games Workshop at that sense. And Games Workshop is like growing, their like line keeps going up, and it shows no meaningful stopping. Like if COVID didn't stop it, like what can, except the like inevitability of like at some point the like cost of making models get so high that like it will eventually start hurting their bottom line. And then and I'm skeptic enough that I think that like only when something hurts bottom line is when like change starts to happen in that level. Like we can do our own individual changes, but like more larger sense, larger scale change demands like a meaningful monetary hurt for the game creators.
Great. And you're reminding me of John Nephew's video. I'll have to find it to post it in the Discord, but John Nephew works at Atlas Games, and of course, during the pandemic, lost access to his sort of Chinese plastic molds and thought, how can I build more sustainable miniatures and game components? And he went on a whole I mean, I would say he's still on this whole track of plastic recycling using a George Foreman grill, actually, just melting down plastic and then reforming it in various capacities and discovering sort of the difference between, clean plastic and dirty plastic, like say from pharmaceutical bottles, which again, the pharmaceutical bottles are one of the most wasteful things that we can we can produce as human beings, and paradoxically, of course, we need them to survive. But plastic recycling is becoming in vogue with analog game producers, I should say. Finally, Changie, what would you tell designers, especially about secondary markets for financialized cardboard products?
Fantastic question, Evan. I think I hate to answer a question with a question, but I'm also like, who are we calling the game designer? I think there's so many layers. Are we saying it is the people who have created the rules of what exactly the Pokemon trading card game is? There's also always that question in the air of buying packs and seeing if you get a hit is also like a kind of game, right? We see this on social media all the time. And so I guess my answer would vary based on like who are you calling the designer? But I think more than that, it's interesting the ways in which there's also work done on Magic the Gathering that's looking at this as well, like the increasing financialization of trading card games. And trading card games have always had this element of there's a super rare card that you may or may not be able to get with a super low percentage of pulling one. But the ways in which that's actually culturally taken up and then made into this very interesting like financial investment, I think is a very big turning point within the trading card game market. And so while perhaps it's a bit of a non-answer in that I'm not super sure what I would tell folks who are perhaps like the game designers, I do think that there is something very interesting about the ways in which scarcity production of rare cards has really capitalized upon a lot of the finance logics that we're seeing, where cards then become this alternative asset, kind of like fine art, in a way that I do think that these companies are fully aware of.
Yeah, and again, the question of who the designer is also has the IP holder in the room, which is one of these issues in training young game designers is that they all want to have access to these IPs and IP holders, and of course, if you're making the connection to the slave plantation or colonialism like that, though they didn't create those IPs, and also like they are part of a asset portfolio that they do not necessarily feel the same thing about that say a fan who would want to create a game for it would. Asa, you have a response?
Yeah, it was really great seeing Chang in your presentation today, because I was just earlier today independently talking about like how I'm seeing like how the card game markets are going towards the same thing that comic books market faced in the 90s, which is the comic books bubble. I feel the same bubble is going to happen there, mostly due to Magic the Gathering and the Secret Lair thing, which feels to me very similar right now, especially with the, I think they will reveal today or yesterday the Star Trek set, which have like signatures from the actors on the cards or something like that, which are now becoming like obviously going to become like massive collector items. But that feels very manufacturing demand, or manufacturing this kind of investment market by wizards themselves. And when comic book manufacturers tried to manufacture an investment, this kind of speculation market in the 90s, that led to the bubble, and that led to the Marvel becoming bankrupt in the 1997. So I can see like this kind of like a road ahead for card game market right now. So it was very, very, very good talk from you.
I appreciate the dialogue, and we're going to go to the question. We have a sole question Q&A that we're going to answer live, which is a general question to the panel. There's a wide range of materials being implicated in the games being discussed. Wood, plastic, and metal have very difficult implications in terms of extraction, recycling, shipping, storing, etc., but they're all being discussed at the same level in the context of analog gaming. Are you guys actually talking about the same class of thing at all? And of course, part of this is that again, if you're looking at the most profitable game industries in 2026, it's all in mobile gaming, which again has coltan and other production, that some of the worst mining practices in the world, implicated as well. But yeah, I mean, okay, yeah, we're still dealing with wood, plastic, and metal, among different other materials. The question for the panel is, how do we differentiate between sort of impacts of materials used in analog games?
So I'm not sure. The plastic side of in like the, let's say, miniature wargaming is mostly became like that like the reduction was chosen mostly because it was like easy and cheap material, and less hazardous than the white metal and previously that lead, which was used in the miniatures in the 1980s. So, but and one reason they can't do that really anymore is that Games Workshop technology for making miniatures was actually very outdated, even in the like 2010s, still like using injector molds instead of like what every other miniature company in the world almost uses, which is like a lot of 3D printing and stuff like that, resin casting and stuff like that. But like the technology limited their like application and changing of materials. But I'm not sure if like there is, yeah, it's a interesting question, because I think the material wise, plastic, like of the like materials that we have for miniatures, I think plastic is like, I know resin is quite toxin, and there's some like a lot of issues with like resin dust and stuff like that, which is like less like can create like health hazards for individual people. I think in that sense plastic is still like one of the better materials for making miniatures. But yeah, I don't know. That's just what I'm thinking right now.
I'm still trying to find John Nephew's video because it was buried in a newsletter, and I opened it up, and then my mind was blown, in which he was like, "Let me break it down from a independent publisher who wants to recycle his own plastic, what you have to go through to do
I,
this." And
I'm very interested. I'm very interested to see that because I know that there are like in model making like different sorts of plastic. Like people talk about hard plastic miniatures, which is the like what Warhammer miniatures are made of, and soft plastic miniatures. And obviously, the soft plastic is much cheaper to make, but I'm not sure if what's their like. Do they have any meaningful difference in like ecological sense from each other, the soft and hard plastic? But like soft plastic is much worse quality plastic than, so then it comes a question of quality. Like a lot of board games use soft plastic because it's cheap, and then a lot of wargaming don't because it's ugly. And but I'm not sure if they have like different sort of ecological footprint in that sense, or like ecological like impact. Do they have any difference there? I'm not sure. I'm very
uh,
interested to see that video if you find.
Yeah, so the upshot is soft plastic you could break down. So even, like plastic film that or plastic bags that American industries often say they can't recycle, they can. It's just that our actual machines are designed for bottles and for specific beverage recycling. But anything that is of soft plastic can be melted down and reformed fairly easily. One of the issues is, of course, is whether or not that plastic is clean when it goes through the sort of recycling process, or if there's detritus and paper ephemera or stickiness that isn't still there. And then, of course, the hard plastic, which we know from the great garbage spiral in the Pacific Ocean, can break down at the down into smaller and smaller and smaller bits and turning into microplastics. But those are still distinct bits and cannot really be recycled in the same way. And so you've got this sort of hard division, because then if you're taking a look at something like, the Dark Tower remake, now you've got hard plastic in the tower, but then soft plastic in the miniatures and so forth. It would be great if our industry was better informed again about the different materials, how things are made, how we arrive at where we're at, and then again to address the other uh, presentations, what moral value or even financial value do these materials bring with them, right? And this is a hard question. If you are making an eco game, you are encouraged to use wood these days. And I, in fact, have a manufacturer who is one of our PhD students, Amanda Carofa, who's making these exact design decisions. Okay, what is this aesthetic? What can I produce locally in Africa, for materials wise? And does this, immediately correspond with the values this game is supposedly professing, in its form and content? Um, in any case, we've got 5 minutes to spare. I will check the Discord again for one last round of questions if we've got some. And this one is from Simon Huber. So Simon, you are you are our next question regarding the pile of shame, which I know from book culture, all the books not read in Japanese exists as the again positively connotated sundoku. Is maybe collecting in the context of game culture a central, playful, though unsustainable way of expression, and financialization then as the cynical way of capitalizing on this innate play drive, worsening the downward spiral, thus annihilating the green ambitions of mitigating the climate catastrophe. So, in other words, there is a playful, almost innocent aspect to our collecting, and then a cynical, perhaps sinister, financialized aspect, and they're kind of two sides of the same coin, perhaps. Yeah, that again is to the panel.
I would love to answer this one if that's
Yep,
okay.
absolutely.
I think the connection to collecting is really interesting, and I completely agree. I think that there are so many elements of the ways in which collecting and investing, like investments are actually forms of like finance, like collecting financial assets, right? Like we cannot think of these things as separate from each other. And for me, the playful aspect of collecting also needs to be interrogated because a lot of scholarship actually looking at collections are not individual collections, but institutional collections. Like, for instance, you go to a museum, you see a collection of stolen artifacts. And so even within this perhaps playful desire to be collecting, there's actually always this troubling that we need to have in terms of like, is this actually innocent? And I think there's a lot of work out there that actually talks about how play is actually quite violent. Play can be quite painful, right? And so I think these connections that you are making with collecting, finance, and also yeah, just the ways in which these types of violences become embedded within each other in very elaborate and intricate ways, I think is a very fascinating connection. So thank you for that.
Jérôme?
Yeah, about the pile of shame. I think this one is quite interesting. It's a strange piece of evidence because uh, it's the only place where players are being honest about what they're doing. Every collection I know contains games we bought sincerely and never played. And the fact that we've give it a name, which is a funny name, uh, with shame, it speaks about the gaming culture, because we decided to metabolize it as a joke rather than a problem. So when we go to see friends and look at the collection, we will be joking about that. And so most of the time, we'll find ecological games in the spa. So that is, I think it's a way to protect ourselves from maybe think deeper about the problem. It's confessing a minor sin. I don't think we've got cynicism, that we are being cynical about. I think it's maybe the opposite. Uh, I think when we buy a game, it's an act of optimism. We are we are buying something we believe it will. Well, we will explore, do right, maybe with our friends. So I don't think there is a cynical. This is some kind of a place where we will be able to say, okay, we are not bad people because we have this game. I think we genuinely think that we're gonna play it, and it might even help us changing something like that.
Thank you. And Aasa, you have the last word here.
Yeah. Uh, the piles of shame in the Maryland Stenros and Heliakka they introduce in their paper. They also talk like want to kind of like shift the like terminology towards piles of potential, as this kind of like there is always like potential in this pile that you have like wrought. It's not something necessarily shameful because it just represents like what you can do with your hobby in that sense, and but that relates more to the like in their paper was much more about like personal sustainability anyways than like ecological in that sense, but they do kind of offer that this kind of like even the playful act of like shame in having excessive amount of games or models or whatever. They want to change it towards like a future good, a potential that need to be like used for something other than just like rotting there in the corner.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks again to all of our panelists for an engaging initial discussion. We'll have a half an hour break, and then we will move on to Lynda Chang's keynote at I guess it's 11 a.m. Eastern, and I urge you to join us in a half an hour. Thank you so much, everyone.